Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you here today on Potholes on the Road to Bethlehem webinar. We are going to be discussing how to navigate the stress and all the anxiety of this nativity season, and how we can put what's most important first. So we're happy to have you here today, but we're really excited. Joining us today, we have Father Alexander Goussetis, who is the priest at Annunciation Parish in Lancaster, PA. And we also have as our other panelist, Dr. George Stavros. George Stavros is actually a classmate of Father Alexander's. They both got their Masters of Divinity from Holy Cross, but George is working as the executive director of the Danielsen Institute, which is a center for pastoral care at Boston University. So welcome to both of you. Before we dive in here, there's just a few little housekeeping notes I want to kind of get into. With all of our webinars, they're all being recorded. And we usually broadcast them about a week after we've gone live, but because Christmas is a week from now, we're actually going to turn this one around and get it out this afternoon, hopefully. So we will send emails out when they're available, post on Facebook and our listserv, so that you can share this, because that's what we really want you to do, is we want you to share these with friends, family members, parishioners, and sit down and discuss all the issues that have kind of come up here and how they're impacting your life and your growth as Christians. So we will be posting this later on today. And for those of you that are watching live, you are able to ask us questions. If you just kind of scroll around on your screen, you'll see a pop-up thing that says Q&A. If you click on there, you can ask us questions. And because this is more of a dialogue, you can feel free to ask throughout the presentation. And you may also ask questions anonymously. So feel free to do that. And the last, but definitely not least thing I'd like to share is, and thank actually, is I'd like to thank Leadership 100. It is through their constant generous support that we're able to provide programs like this. And we've been providing webinars for about almost 2 years now. And it's had a huge impact on a lot of people. And we're so grateful to them for their support. So the reason you're all here, potholes on the way to the way to the Nativity, on the way to Bethlehem. So let's just get started by talking a little bit about what that stress is. What is stress? You know, Dr. Stavros, if we could kind of start off and lay a foundation for what that is, and then maybe talk a little bit about why this season is so full of that, that would be helpful. So welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. And it's great to be here with you and with Father Alex. So I'm thinking in just introducing on a very general level what stress and anxiety are, I should probably be a little shrinky and talk about the brain. And this is a very basic physiology of the brain. The brain's made up of 3 basic parts. They work together, but they also have their own independent functions. The oldest part of the brain, the deep brain, is the part of our brain that controls the automatic things that happen in our system, our blood flow, our heart rate, our respiration, things that, in a sense, just keep the human body regulated and getting the nutrients that it needs, digestion, respiration, things like that. Then the next part of the brain is called the limbic brain. And the limbic brain is responsible for things like emotion regulation, memory. Those are some of the most important functions of the limbic brain. And then the part of the brain that we think of most commonly when we're thinking of the brain is the part that really does the bulk of the thinking. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex solves problems, makes decisions, learns, really connects ideas. It's responsible for things like impulse control. And it's the part of our brain that is like the boss in a way. It makes decisions. Stress and anxiety live mostly in that second part of the brain, the limbic brain. And what anxiety is for human beings, as it is for many mammals, is it's a way of sending an early warning signal in the face of something that's threatening. Now, when life wasn't so urban and so structured and regulated, when there was more to really be aware of in terms of being life-threatening, that deep brain and the limbic part of the brain helped keep people alive by sending signals, like if there was a rustling of leaves nearby, to call attention to a possible predator, big things like that. And we commonly hear about the fight-flight response, which is a way that human beings respond to threat. It's the body, the brain sends the whole body signals to change itself from thinking and being in a relaxed state to being ready to confront or run away from some threat. Where that gets complicated these days, and where it gets complicated on the road to Bethlehem, is it's a system that lights up quickly in the face of threat and then takes a long time to cool off. It'd be easier in some ways if it was the other way around, but the way that it works is anxiety can hit pretty quickly, and we don't always know what the threat is that we're responding to. Sometimes it's a car coming quickly from the wrong direction. Sometimes it's thinking about how much work we've got to do. Sometimes it's just a product of being fatigued or undernourished or overscheduled. Anything that you can think of that feels stressful can activate a fight-flight response, which then becomes kind of an overdone response to whatever it is we need to do. And when we're in that anxious place, it becomes very hard for the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, to make decisions, to solve problems, because we're caught in that experience of anxiety. So hopefully one of the things that we're going to end up talking about today is ways in which this natural early warning system called anxiety can get triggered, particularly in certain parts of the calendar year and with certain things coming at us, and how we can find ways to respond through the wisdom of the church and really the wisdom of solid mental health to not have anxiety be something that really is a great source of suffering during this time or any time.
Thank you, Dr. Stavros. Father Alex, I'm just wondering, this time of period in preparation for the coming of our Lord, it's a fasting period, and the church offers us things to prepare us, but it feels very different, at least to me, than the Great Lent fast, and it feels more challenging to kind of connect with what the church has to offer. Can you talk a little bit more about this season of preparation?
I'd be happy to. It's great to be with you, Melissa and Dr. Stavros. Before we even discuss Advent and fasting, in preparing for today and in giving thought and a little research, I took some time to think about why is it that we have such anxiety and stress during this season? And when did it start? And what role does the church play in cultivating this anxiety and stress? And I was really quite surprised to learn that in the early church, the first centuries of the church, the three major feast days of the church were Pascha, Pentecost, and Theophany. And Christmas, as a separate feast day, wasn't even on the roadmap until many centuries, perhaps the 4th century, and in Jerusalem, not until the 6th century, because Theophany and Nativity were both celebrated on the same day, on January 6th. It was kind of a revealing or manifestation of Christ. And so they were kind of celebrated together. So it was really not until many centuries after the church started that there was even a separate feast day that we honor the birth of Christ. And since then, even more centuries later to the present day, if you look liturgically, and I always go there to get to be as a starting point, because the church calendar is the best roadmap for our seasons and the rhythm of life. And even to this day, there really is very little that's done liturgically for this season than is done for Lent and Holy Week and Pascha. And so the takeaway that I get from that is that, in a way, we set ourselves up for disappointment and anxiety because the culture is pressing us about what this season should be about and not the church. And so I think we should take refuge in that in terms of what stresses and pressures are we putting on ourselves or our society or our families, that really the church has a very, very different perspective and viewpoint on how to prepare for this season. But more specifically, having to do with Advent, even that's a pretty late development. In some of the research I did, not really to the 9th century was the 40-day period before Christmas. So even that's a pretty late development for us as Orthodox. And there certainly is the time for fasting and time for reflection and so forth. But I think it has a different spirit than the Lent and Holy Week experience. And on a practical level, I would even say that my sense and experience as a parish priest is that there's more unity in the parish during Lent and Pascha than during the Christmas season, because people are really more scattered and stressed during Christmas, and yet they're more focused on the worship services during Lent and Holy Week. So I think even the way parishes function are quite different between how we're preparing for Christmas than how we're preparing for Pascha.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. Knowing that, that contrast of that we're being pulled in a million different directions during this period, and not necessarily as pulled to the church, how do we refocus despite everything that's out there telling us what we should be doing, in the media, what we should be doing to prepare for Christmas? And I can't help but think of all the images that we're bombarded with in our society of what a happy Christmas looks like, what a good Christmas looks like, how all the decorations are perfect, how your tree is the perfect tree, how your gifts are just the best gifts for each person you've given them to. And everything is focused on what, happy families together all the time. And if your Christmas doesn't look like that, then maybe you're doing something wrong. How do these images, and how do we combat these images and really, try to embrace the imperfection during the season and look for grace in it?
Did you want to respond, Dr. Stavros, first? Let me take a shot at it.
Go ahead.
So, Melissa, what your question got me thinking about is just how crucial the idea of relationships are in helping people feel settled into where they are, where they feel most secure, where they feel the most connected, and how those images that you shared of a perfect Christmas are almost impossible to attain. I mean, they may happen in little moments along the way, but they're completely unsustainable in normal everyday life. So let me just throw one more shrinky thing in, and then I promise I'm done after that. But the psychological theory that I tend to lean on that helps us understand just how basic, fundamental, and primary human relationships are in the development of healthy humans, it's called attachment theory. And what attachment theory at its most basic level says is that the relational security that caretakers who are attuned to young developing children, the relational security that they provide is the foundation for that child then to learn to manage their own internal world, but even more importantly, to explore the external world. So without relational security, without attuned caretaking in the early years, it becomes very difficult, first of all, to have a settled inner life. And it's also very difficult then to learn, to take in the majesty and mystery of God's creation. So in those times when we feel anxious, when we feel disconnected, and what we've learned is that the degree to which there was some absence of that relational security at some point in a person's life, we become more vulnerable to inner turmoil, to the anxiety that comes with this season. When we feel that inner turmoil, I don't know why it works this way, but the time that I've been privileged to spend with people working on improving their lives and quelling their suffering, it has taught me that when there is that inner turmoil, one of three things happens inevitably. We blame somebody else for it because we feel so bad. We direct self-hating thoughts towards ourselves because we feel so bad, or we do whatever we can to distract ourselves from the inner discomfort. What I think these images of perfection do, and part of this is because a lot of thought has gone into the way marketing happens at this time of year, is there's an offering of delicious distractions in order to steer us away from a broken relational place. And it doesn't work. There are no shortcuts for broken relational places. There's only healing relationship. And as fast as that sympathetic nervous system can get tweaked into a fight-flight, it's what's called the parasympathetic nervous system that slows things down. And the main vehicle for slowing down the parasympathetic nervous system is secure relationship. It's not a good-looking wrapping on a present. It's not a beautiful Christmas tree. It's not, spiked eggnog. It's secure relating.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you. I also want to touch upon the theme of relationship that you both have mentioned. And what I call to mind is the gospel reading that's for this Sunday. So it's the Sunday before Christmas. And it's the genealogy. And my kids now are 20, 18, and 16. But from their youngest ages, they used to love and still love to hear that gospel with all the funny names and all the giggling that happens of Zerubbabel and Jehoshaphat and everyone else. It's such a funny, humorous at least, reading of the gospel. But I think if we look carefully in that reading of Jesus's genealogy, which is always read the Sunday before Christmas, you really stumble upon some very questionable characters, because we're talking about relationships now, and these are Jesus's relations. And if we look at some of those names, and there's a whole slew of them, but for example, Jacob, who stole his brother Esau's birthright. You have Rahab, who was a prostitute, and you have David, who committed adultery and murder. And these are people who are part of Jesus's genealogy. And so the takeaway for me is that even Jesus Christ, the Savior and the Messiah, really came from a family tree that was not idealized, was not perfect, fell far short of what we picture for our families, and that for ourselves, that perhaps we can encourage patience with our imperfect families, and not to make that the goal. Not to say that I can't enjoy this feast day or my life until my family is in this idealized position. Because if Jesus comes from this kind of lineage, we certainly all do as well. And hopefully that gives us a state of reassurance and peacefulness. And as Dr. Stavros highlighted, an invitation now to make our relationships stronger and healthier. And just as a sidebar, in so many of the readings of our church and the theology of our church, we don't really talk always, or we don't really just emphasize morality of good and bad. we really speak much more about healthy and unhealthy, and what's healthy and where we are ill, because the church is a spiritual hospital. So maybe we need to reframe our relationships in terms of which ones are healthy, which ones are ill, and to secure more the ones that are healthier and the ones that are life-giving and affirming. Because again, Dr. Stavros makes a great point that the stronger and healthier our relationships, the more peaceful we'll be, and the less the anxiety and stress of this season will overwhelm us.
What a beautiful reminder, Father Alex, of just what that gospel passage means. I have to be honest, I, for a long time, struggled with that passage and was like, why are we just reading all these names? Until that had been shared with me, that it's this idea that of the imperfect line that of people that came before Christ. And certainly if his family lineage has a lot of imperfections, ours certainly are. And I what I'm thinking of is that, during these this next couple of weeks and stuff, and in celebration, we are going to get to spend probably a lot of time with our family members. And some of that will be beautiful and wonderful and blessed, and others will be more time, other parts of that time will be much more challenging, navigating difficult relationships, navigating a variety of things that play into families. What are some ways, strategies that we can set boundaries or even set up safety nets to help us through those situations, so that we go in with realistic expectations and not have the image of, again, the little commercials that they show on TV of the family happy all around and everything goes perfect, during the holiday season. How can we take care of ourselves in those challenging relationships that some of us may have?
That's a good question, Melissa. And I mean, obviously, I don't think there's one easy answer. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking there's a range of ways to think about that. Maybe the most rare, but it's important to acknowledge, is that some families at some times just naturally are good together. They find a place where there's a kind of give and take, a relative comfort, a benefit of the doubt given to one another, enough shared interest, not a whole lot of external distraction impinging on the time together. And there can be a kind of sweet renewal of relationship that comes for some families, maybe many families, for some of the time. And I would say in relation to those times, just be grateful for them and let them be and soak them in and even explicitly acknowledge it's good for us to be together in this way. I think just as likely for some families or most families is there's going to be a trade-off between the wish for closeness, connection, and reconnection, and the inevitable kinds of conflicts, hurt feelings, histories of trauma and conflict that are built into those relationships long term. Part of people's developmental history together, there are going to be potholes, landmines that it makes sense to anticipate that they're going to get hit. And if that is something in any of our families that we're anticipating, then thinking about things like safety nets, it really does make sense. And some of those things, I think some of those things include, one, just naming it within a safe inner circle of people, speaking it out loud with people that you trust, that, hey, I'm anticipating going into this situation, or our family going into this situation where, my sister-in-law always ends up getting into something with my brother-in-law, and then it just lights a match and the whole thing goes up in flames and there are all kinds of hurt feelings. If there's some anticipation of that, name it, and then going into the situation, just try to build in some sort of rhythm and structure to that particular stretch of time that makes things a little bit more expectable or anticipatable, that creates space to get out of it if need be, that creates hand signals or eye signals between key allies in the room that says, okay, we see what's going on here. We're good with each other. That may be the best, the best we can do for those periods of time. And then at the other extreme, there are situations where the desire for closeness maybe needs to get measured against whether or not it really does make sense to get together with potentially high conflict situations. And in those situations, the pain and disappointment that can go with wishing we could trade up on our family and get a new deal can be offset to some degree by just trying to, again, identify relationally secure situations that don't have to live up to the high expectations of the perfect family Christmas gathering that are so accessible in these days. So that's just 3 quick ideas.
I would mirror that, and I hope that the people listening will underscore and maybe rewind and listen to that again. That really is such a perfect outline of how to consider those stressful family gatherings. And I can tell you from a parish perspective how much counseling and in the context of confession, these conversations take place about the stresses of families, especially during feast days. And there really is a great deal of conversation that takes place about praying beforehand and visualizing what that day is going to be like and who may be there and what conversations may take place. Not to anticipate problems, but in order to keep us more at peace if these things arise, and to perhaps even limit the time together of fulfilling our obligation, but not stretching it out. And perhaps even being patient for the greater good, to be patient for the greater good of the family, that at least we can do our part to make this a peaceful time together. And I just have an image, if I could share with you, perhaps about the meal and the time together, but maybe even as a general rule about this Advent season and the stress. And I think of my father-in-law who was a pilot, who's now retired. He was a pilot in the Navy and also a commercial pilot. And he would tell me that in times of really severe weather, especially fog, but really any kind of really challenging, threatening weather, that he needed to really focus and trust the instrument panel, the gauges, in order to reach his destination safely. Because his gut feeling as a pilot would be to check your feelings. In other words, I have a feel for this, or I have an instinct for what to do. But he said that's a very dangerous thing when you're a pilot, because you can't always measure the horizon and the land and water and so forth, because you're easily deceived. So he said, I really would have to check myself in times of poor weather and trust the instrument panel, trust what the gauges are telling me in order to reach a safe destination. And I think the same is true in these very stressful moments of a holiday meal, and especially just the whole season as a whole, that we're going to have a number of strong feelings. We're going to be swayed by the culture and everything that's happening around us. And we have to instead trust what the church is teaching us, what the church is modeling for us, and to ultimately realize that if we follow the instrument panel of the church, that we will reach a holy and a safe destination. And I think that's hard to do because we often go with feel, we often go with our gut, and we're often influenced by the society around us. But we have to really channel that and be still and be quiet and prayerful, and then trust what the church is telling us to get through these particular stressful seasons.
Can I just ask a little bit more about that idea of being still and being prayerful during this season? And I think that Dr. Stavros, I know that you had done some work on research on prayer and stuff. Can we talk just a little bit more about prayer and in in our lives during periods of stress and how it can impact us?
Well, I can say a quick word. I had the good fortune as part of my doctoral studies to finish those studies with a dissertation. I got approval to do a dissertation on the Jesus prayer and some of the mental health consequences of practicing the Jesus prayer. And just to shrink it down quickly, a little bit over 100 people agreed to be in the study. Half of them learned to pray the Jesus prayer and practiced it every day, 10 minutes a day for a month. The other half just didn't change anything about what they were doing. And nobody was praying the Jesus prayer at the time. So 50 learned it and practiced, and 50 just continued doing whatever they were doing. And then we compared the two groups at the beginning and at the end of the 30 days. And what we found was that the group that had practiced the Jesus prayer had lower symptoms of depression, had lower symptoms of anxiety, had lower symptoms of hostility towards others, and had lower symptoms of interpersonal sensitivity to others. They weren't hurt as easily by others. So on the one hand, I think that tells us something that we already had some sense of already, and that is that practicing the Jesus prayer in this contemplative way has positive effects for somebody. What I don't want to claim is that that was the case for every single person who prayed the Jesus prayer. There's no one solution fits all for everyone, but that is such a core piece of Orthodox spirituality and practice. I'll leave it to Father Alex to kind of flesh that out, but it was connected with regulating that limbic brain, if you will. And, you know, I was thinking, Father Alex, when you're talking about the instruments, if a person goes by feel when they are stirred up relationally in a negative way, they only get 3 readings. They get, it's your fault, it's my fault, or I need to do something to distract myself because I don't feel good.
Right.
And the part of the brain that can make decisions about, I need to go be still, I need to read some Psalms, you know, I need to go worship, I need to do something for myself. It's like it gets shut off. And so having thought ahead of time, reading the instruments that the church provides I think it's a piece of ancient wisdom and ancient psychology that predates by centuries, by millennia, the kind of things that I'm talking about. I think the church in her wisdom has always known that people need a relationship with God ultimately that is secure in order to be regulated and connected.
Mm-hmm. And connected with everything that was just said, we have the scriptural example of Martha and Mary in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, of Martha preparing the meal and running around and in essence doing something good. She certainly was not doing something that was evil or unethical. This was a gracious thing. Hospitality is always seen as a virtue. But yet, when her sister Mary sits at the feet of Jesus, Jesus highlights this is what is of most importance. She chose the greater part. And I think in this season in which we are very busy with many expectations, that we do get stressed and we do turn into Marthas. And ideally, we're invited to become more like Mary and to sit at the feet of Jesus. There is a practice that we've done many years in my parish called an Advent prayer chain. And what happens is we take our church directory and we ask for volunteers. And this year we have maybe about 15 or 18 people. And we divide our directory into 15 and 18, or however many people we have. And so each day we lift up the names of the families and people in the families through the Jesus prayer. So Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy upon the Stavros family and so forth. And so we divide up the directory, and then each day we rotate and take a different set of names each day. And so every single day during Advent, every single family and person in our community is being prayed for through the Jesus prayer. And the goal or the hope is that because this Advent season brings so much stress and thinking about ourselves, by offering in this Advent prayer chain and lifting other people up, it becomes other-centered and not just something focused on ourselves. And I think the more we think about others in a holy way, the more our focus is on someone else's needs and not mine. I know for myself, it tends to lessen my anxiety and stress. And I think it makes it a communal experience. In our faith, if nothing else, is a relational and a community experience. It's not just me and God. It's not just me and the Bible and God. Everything is orthodoxy in our faith is about being part of the community and part of being something bigger than ourselves. So this Advent prayer chain has grown over the years, and I think people find some level of peace. And I think the reason why is, again, that it takes the emphasis off of ourselves and makes it a prayerful experience when we focus on others.
That's beautiful. What a wonderful idea. And just building on that idea of intercessory prayer, if I could just share one just small story in my own personal life. There was a time I was really struggling with someone greatly and being directed by my spiritual father to really pray for that person, even though I didn't want to, fairly regularly. And when I had dealings with that person again, it was very different. And I realized that it wasn't like it magically got better. It wasn't that. There was still the struggle there. But I realized that through that intercessory prayer, like my heart had softened and I was a little bit transformed and I was a little less wrapped up in myself and better able to be present for that person with their challenges. And who knows, maybe they were, praying for me and better able to be there with all of my challenges too, which I think can be a really good, hard model to do, but important as we head into those situations.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're getting actually a lot of questions here, but I want to touch on one more thing before we switch over to the questions, because some of the last area that we were going to discuss covers some of the questions. But, I know that this Friday is my son's last day of school before the Christmas break, which we're all looking forward to. But as we think about it, our family's life is really rooted, the rhythm of it is rooted around his school schedule and our work schedule and having those daily things that we have to do daily. They make us get enough sleep the night before. They make us plan our mornings so when we know we're going to get up and, do whatever exercise we need to do or prayer or everything, it gives us a rhythm. That seems to all kind of be blown up when we're off schedule. And, to some extent, that's good to have the downtime. But I think sometimes we get so out of rhythm that it's not restorative to us. Is that something common during this time? And what should we be doing as families about it?
When we were discussing the webinar, this was actually one of my favorite parts of our discussion with each other, because it certainly hit home as I get ready to spend more time at home in the house with everybody in the family there. And there's a sweet anticipation to that I think, Father Alex, you spoke to really well when we were talking about it, that there's something about that just to be grateful for, to have a kind of different space to enter into. And it kind of goes along with that idea that many families, for part of the time, really can sink into a kind of sweet, different space when it's opened up for us. And I think the simultaneous truth is that most families, most of the time, are also very dependent on the structures that hold and carry them throughout the day and the week. And so maybe one idea is, while still allowing for a different kind of space for togetherness, where people can play games together or watch movies together or just sit together and read, or be less, less structured and regimented around schedule, that we don't completely let go of the idea of having a rhythm to our downtime, but that we create markers that are further apart from one another. Things like, let's make sure we exercise every other day and have that be a marker. Well, let's make sure we have one good regular meal where we're all sitting down together and make that a marker. Well, let's plan on going to a movie all together in 3 days, so that the space isn't bereft of anticipation and structure, nor is it flooded with just replaced structures that don't allow for spontaneity and creativity.
I agree with that there are families, and that there should be a wide variety of ways in which we spend this time together. And some families may need to have it a little more structured. Some may need it a little less structured. And I think that's part of our responsibility as parents, to be somewhat discerning and to sense what we need as a family, so that we can direct our families to how to best use this time. There's a particular monastery that I'm very close with, and I wanted to visit with them, with my whole family, a few days between Christmas and New Year's. And I called up and asked if we could come and visit and stay for a couple days. And they said, you know what, we're kind of closed. We're not going to be having services, and you're welcome to stay in the guest house and so forth, but we're not really having regular services like we usually have. So that really was kind of a message to me that even in monasteries, which we think are so rigidly structured, that even they have certain time periods of the year in which they're a little bit more relaxed in terms of what the community needs to kind of maybe be restful or be still and then recharge again. So I think we've made other plans, of course, since we won't be visiting that monastery. But I think there should be that kind of flexibility, and maybe it'll change from year to year. What state are our children in? What state are we in? What kind of year have we had? Do we need something that's an activity that brings us together? Or has it been an overly stressful year that we need a little bit of time to just be still and share our time quietly? So I think parents hopefully can give some thought in preparation for that Christmas break, and to give some thought of what does our family need? What would be best for our family? Something that's more adventurous, or something that's a little bit quieter, so that at the end of that Christmas time period, in whatever we decide to do, that we feel closer and that we feel more restored and stronger in our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I would say that, you said each family, it's different and everything. I think even within the family, each child is different in what their needs are during that period. Some children need much more sleep than others. And, you always say when they're off school, oh, they can stay up a little later. But you know what, to some kids, that doesn't work well at all. It doesn't go well. And they don't, just because they stay up later doesn't mean they sleep in the next morning anymore and get more sleep. So it can cause, getting out of that sleep schedule can cause a lot of issues within the family as well. I think that it's important we look at our individual families' needs and kind of make that plan for what's going to work for us. But I think those were some really important things. I'm going to look at some of the questions we have here. One of them, are stress and anxiety distinguishable? And if so, how? That sounds like a Dr. Stavros question.
Yeah. So there's not a yes or no answer to this, but it's a great question. Let me just offer a couple thoughts about it. I don't know that it'll answer the question though. So anxiety it's natural, it's necessary, it's built into the architecture of being a human being. It's our early warning system. Stress is a response. Stress can be thought of as a response to anxiety. And stress can involve a whole response to anxiety, which is like a release of cortisol into the body, a change of blood flow away from the front of the brain into the large muscles of the shoulders and the hips in preparation for physical response to the threat. And stress almost always is not connected to a physical threat in our modern world. It used to be more often connected to physical threat, and certainly in situations like the military or emergency responders, their stress is connected with physical threat. But for many people, probably for most people, that's not really the case. So when we become stressed and our bodies get ready to respond physically to something, it's often to something that is solvable in some way other than physically. So two things need to happen in our stress response. One is we have to give our bodies a chance to respond to something. Otherwise, those hormones won't get burned off. So one thing that's crucial to managing the stress response from anxiety is some kind of physical activity in anticipation of it and in the face of it, because it's only physical activity that changes the body back to its regulated state when it gets at the stress response. The second thing is, without getting the body back to its regulated state, we're unable to free up the prefrontal cortex to do the problem-solving, organizing, decision-making to address the thing that's stressing us out to begin with. So stress is a way of talking about the way everything ties together. Anxiety is more a way of talking about the early warning system.
Okay, wonderful. Anything else with that? I think this next question we mostly answered, but I don't know if there's anything else we want to build on it. Please discuss the need to get adequate sleep and exercise, the effects of exercise on controlling depression and anxiety. You just talked a little bit about that, Dr. Stavros. So I think we've covered that. I don't know if there's anything else that we want to say with that.
I would just briefly add that not only for this Advent period, but throughout the year, one of the things I really respect and appreciate so much about the Orthodox faith is that the emphasis is not only on our spiritual lives. It's concerned with our mind, our body, and our souls. There's the entire personhood that is addressed and prayed for. Even during the unction service, for example, the prayers are very clear that this is not only for physical healing, but it's for spiritual, for emotional healing. And so in all of the sacraments and in all of the prayer services of the church, the emphasis is not only on the spiritual life, but on the entire person. From the very early days of the church, the church responded against dualism to say that only the spirit matters and the material creation has no value or may even be evil. And I think this is a really important dynamic in our church that's very contemporary, because that's what we're hearing from the science world as well, about the integration of ourselves as people. And so this issue about diet and exercise is not just for Advent, but it really takes into effect and into account the entire person, that we need to develop healthy practices, not only with our spiritual lives and having a rule of prayer, but every aspect of our lives. Because if we're not eating well, we're not sleeping well, it's inevitably going to affect our prayer time and our spiritual life. So we can't compartmentalize to the degree that we ignore diet, exercise, and the other parts of who we are as people. So again, it's just something I greatly respect and appreciate about our church, that it's always looked at the entire human person and not only about cultivating the spiritual dimension of who we are.
So Melissa, just so that I can affirm that my dear brother, Father Alex, doesn't just respect it, he lives it. He said to me on more than one occasion that the 30 minutes that I spend on the elliptical machine is as important a part of my prayer life as the Jesus prayer that I say before I go to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
That's good. I have to say one thing you said earlier, Dr. Stavros, is that, that idea that when you're in that state of stress of kind of that fight or flight, that only doing something physical will get you out of that was just really kind of struck me like, wow, so, what we need to do when that happens is move somehow, to move ourselves past that and everything. So that was really powerful to hear. So thank you for that. Can you discuss how to manage old calendar and new calendar? We have a family who belong to both. And this person says that they break the fast on the new calendar to celebrate on the 25th, and then they do their best to fast until January 7th. So any advice on navigating that when you have a family that's straddling two calendars?
I'll respond first. I think we have to be practical and not be overly pharisaical when we address these family issues. My Goussetis family is mostly Roman Catholic, and even something like Thanksgiving, which I'm sure is going to be heresy for some hearing this, but we eat turkey with my family on Thanksgiving Day because it's a day that is a day of thanksgiving and to God for all of God's blessings. And what point would I be making, or my family making, if we get together as a family and we protest or decide not to eat turkey to make a point that we're fasting? There has to be some things that we do that create family harmony. And so for that one day, we eat whatever's served and we enjoy the day together. And the following day, we begin the fast again. I think pastorally speaking, we have to be practical. We have to be compassionate, empathic with our interfaith marriages. And not only interfaith, but people even within our families that may be non-believers completely. And so I think the same way that I just discussed Thanksgiving, we might consider for the Christmas season and the different calendars that we're on. I think there's a time and a place to make a stand and to defend our faith and to live the way the church teaches us. And I think there's other ways that I think we have to be somewhat thoughtful and considerate of others while still maintaining the spirit of what the fast is calling us to do.
Thank you, Father. This next question that comes in talks about someone whose children live far away, and their mother and siblings are also far away, and traveling is just not doable due to a variety of reasons. Friends have grown and no longer include them in their holiday gatherings. And that this causes a lot of sadness, that holidays aren't what they used to be. There's nothing that can we really do to change this. It's hard nothing will measure up to how this season used to be for this person. How do we combat, what holidays used to be when there was more families were together? If we are empty nesters now, or even for me, I'll say I'm in Florida, and my family, my brother and my parents are all in California. We're not going to be together during this season. How do we deal with that sadness that comes during this season?
I'll just speak very briefly about this. Perhaps we can reframe our understanding of family to not only emphasize our biological family, but our church family. And if our goal is to recreate something from the past, we're probably going to be disappointed. So perhaps we can reframe it and become part of our church family. And if we're empty nesters, to perhaps invite people over to our home for a visit, or accept an invitation to someone else's family for their celebration. We're never going to replace exactly what we're looking for, because we do live in a transient society, or maybe there's been a death in the family that permanently impacts those family gatherings. But hopefully we can reframe and broaden our understanding of family. Because quite frankly, even Jesus says that my mother and brother are those who do the will of God. So even Jesus expands the understanding of family beyond only his biological family, but those who do the will of God. So in that sense, we truly are a church family. And if we think on those terms, we can make those kinds of connections and those healthy relationships that Dr. Stavros highlighted earlier.
Father Alex, I agree with you completely on that. I wanted just to ask a little clarifying, because I guess for me, being away from my family too, this question kind of spoke to my heart a little bit. And I would say I especially feel it there's during Anastasi, during the resurrection service, there was our house was kind of the center house during Pascha. Everybody, I had friends that lived several hours away, and everybody would come to our house, and we would all go to midnight services together. And and so at every Anastasi service, there's a little part of me that remembers that, and I do feel a little bit sad. So is it okay to be a little bit sad and to remember what was, while still looking towards the future and stuff?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I can't think of a Pascha that I don't think about my parents and my grandparents and people who I celebrated these feast days. And I have only the warmest, fondest memories. And sure, I'll cry a little bit and think about that. So I think it's completely normal. I mean, Dr. Stavros can respond more accurately from a psychological perspective, but I think about it, I reflect upon it, I grieve a little bit, but I'm also more grateful than anything else that I did have those memories and those experiences. And but at the same time, I also want to live in the moment and to celebrate what I do have now, and create something new.
I have little to no capacity to draw upon like scriptural verses in a timely way, but I will say this just about this one, because it affects what I do every day as a psychotherapist. There's something increasingly powerful for me about when in the Beatitudes, when Jesus was I think that was the Sermon on the Mount. Father Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. Okay. He said, "Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted." That there's something, just from the perspective of a clinician, there's something about feeling shame or feeling wrong about feelings of sadness, that somehow that they're wrong or off, or maybe even religiously inappropriate to feel sad, because the kingdom of heaven is about joy. I have found more healing moments when somebody is able to and even for myself, to genuinely sink into and be present to the part of us that is deeply grieving some sense of relational loss or rupture. It goes back to this attachment theory. A child with a healthy attachment, when a 2-year-old child with a healthy attachment, if their parent leaves the room unexpectedly, they grieve. They grieve with their whole body. Where are you going? What did you do? What's happened? They cry. They feel it. And then the reunion with that parent occurs. There's a whole body of research about this. When the parent returns, the reunion secures the relationship again, and that child, after grieving powerfully, moves back into exploring the world and now what's in front of them. It's built into the fabric of who we are, that we grieve for the things that we've lost that are important to us. That is crucial. And there's even stress reduction value in tears. The tears that fall, if you did an analysis of them from a chemical perspective, are filled with what? Stress hormones pouring out of the body. So yes, Melissa, you, me, anybody who's got something to grieve, and it brightens up after that. It's a storm.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Amen.
You know, we have two more questions here. I know we're coming to the end of our time, and so I just want to share them because I think they're both good questions to kind of wrap things up. You know, can you speak about the role of gifts in Christmas and how we as Orthodox Christians should or should not offer gifts within the family versus focusing on giving to those who truly need gifts or actual necessities in life? And then along that lines also, is the devil trying to distract us with being too busy to think of the true meaning of Christmas, the birth of Jesus? So how do we keep these things and keep us focused?
In my own family, if I can just, even as a kid, growing up, we went to church Christmas Day, and my family growing up did not give a whole lot of gifts. They just lived simple lives. So we'd go to church Christmas morning, we'd come home, we'd have this big elaborate lunch, you know, Greek style for 2 hours talking. And of course, as a little kid, I can't wait to open my gifts. By the time I opened my gifts, most of my neighbor kids already broke their toys because they opened them hours before. But there was something that I learned that I transferred over to our children growing up. They're 20, 18, and 16 now. But growing up, we really made a point to offer 3 gifts for them, 3 gifts for each child. One was a spiritual gift, you know, a book of some kind or a video. One was a practical gift, maybe clothes or something. And the other was a fun gift, something that they would enjoy. And that's what we limited it to, because we didn't want there to be an overemphasis on the material aspect of it. I'm not a Scrooge to eliminate that completely. There's a role for that. There's a place for that, of sharing a gift, of being thoughtful of what you might enjoy as a gift. So I'm fine with gifts. In our family, again, we just limited it to 3 gifts for each child. But I think together with that is to maybe instill in our children that what can we do to offer a gift to someone else, whether that means, you know, raking the leaves for our neighbor or cooking a meal for somebody in need in our community. So this way our children learn that gift giving is not just something that we receive or even share with our family, but to think again outside of ourselves. And in terms of the devil thing, I mean, it's always going to be a struggle. That's part of the spiritual unseen warfare, whether it's Christmas or whether it's going on vacation or just going to work every day. We're always going to be tempted. We're always going to be potentially distracted. We just need to keep our focus. And as Christ says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be addressed as well.
And one more clarifying with regard to the gift. We could actually do an entire webinar just on gift giving at Christmas time, because it's such a difficult thing to navigate. Is there any advice you would give people who might have relatives that give way more gifts than they want their children to have to them, or way more expensive gifts? How do we navigate that graciously?
Dr. Stavros, that's yours.
I was so glad that was yours.
All of a sudden you guys are like, the webinar's supposed to be over, Melissa.
You know what? I think on a first pass, you just try to use gratitude and hospitality, and then get out in front of it for the next year. I don't think you can really hold it off in the moment if it's coming in an unexpected way. But I do think then a conversation in October or November in anticipation of the coming year is probably the best way to do it.
That's exactly our life experience. I didn't want to bring this up, but my in-laws, who are very generous and wonderful people, just used to overload our kids with gifts. And we would have that conversation with them of, we're trying to teach them simplicity, simpleness and things. And so we had to have the conversation with them a few times at the following year, just give them a few things. Because otherwise my kids would open up gifts here and all they wanted to know is, hey, when are we going to their house so we can get 1,000 gifts? So it is something that you have to have that conversation about. And thank God it's been great ever since.
Sorry to throw that last one on you both there. It's been wonderful having you. Any final thoughts from either of you as we wrap up here? Well, I can say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a gift to be able to do this, and to share with whoever's watching. Thank you for the opportunity.
Same here. It's
Thank
a
you,
blessing to have this conversation with both of you and with everyone listening. And we pray for God's peace on all our families, on the church, and on the world during these difficult days.
Thank you both so much. And just to all of you out there, wishing you a blessed Nativity season with your families. Please keep our office, the Center for Family Care, in your prayers. As we close, as I said, this is being recorded. You will find out about it our Facebook page will post once it's live. We can also send out on our listserv. If you want information on how to like our listserv or how to sign up for our listserv or like our Facebook page, you can visit our website at www.family.goarch.org. Thank you all so much. God bless and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.